Welcome to my podcast, Scientist Free from Religion. This podcast has as proposal, as main idea to talk about the scientific topic, but also talk about religion. Different from the common assumption in which science and religion should be separated, here on this podcast we recognize formally that science and religion are not disconnected. Sadly, religion can be a very big threat to science. So on this podcast, the proposal is to talk about it freely, so without fear, without the illusion that they are separate topics. So we are going to cover a possible topic. Most of them will be focused on the connection between religion and science, especially to defend science. That's our goal. Our goal here is to defend science from religion and to help to make science, to spread scientific thinking, especially to defend it against religion.
Welcome to the debate. We are addressing a core tension in modern intellectual life, the relationship between scientific knowledge and religious faith. Specifically, we're examining the claim made by prominent Christian scientists, people deeply immersed in modern biology and cosmology, that their belief in a personal intervening God is actually entirely compatible with empirical science.
And that compatibility, I would argue, is founded not on some kind of evasion, but on the profound intellectual realization that science, while superb at explaining how the universe works, is utterly silent on why it exists or what its ultimate purpose might be.
Exactly. So the central question we're facing today is this: can the defining conclusions of modern science, evolutionary complexity, the physical laws of the cosmos, the origins of human morality, can they truly be reconciled with the concept of a personal interventionist God? Or does this attempt introduce logical inconsistencies that really fundamentally compromise the scientific worldview? I'll be arguing that the scientific evidence consistently renders the concept of a designer either unnecessary or, frankly, fundamentally contradictory.
And I'll be maintaining the opposite position. I argue that science and faith are not only compatible, but can be mutually enriching. The universe we observe, governed by such elegant and precise laws, exhibits clear signposts of intelligent design, making a creator the most rational explanation for reality as a whole. For me, the journey really begins by reframing this perceived conflict. The idea isn't that God created the world by, magic or some sudden fiat. Rather, God set up the elegant underlying mathematical laws of the universe. This orderliness is in itself a powerful signpost of intelligence. The universe is comprehensible because it was created by a great mind. So if that creator intended to eventually produce creatures capable of genuine love, morality, and, conversation, what better, more magnificent or more elegant mechanism could be chosen than evolution? Evolution proceeds precisely according to the laws God established.
And for a creator who exists outside of space and time, the long duration of evolution is, philosophically, completely insignificant. The intention, the design, was in the setup from the very beginning.
I see why you think that. I do. But let me offer a different perspective. That framework, where evolution is merely God's chosen mechanism, a concept often called theistic evolution, it seems to me to be an intellectual compromise. It feels designed to maintain a belief structure after the scientific revolution has made that structure obsolete. The core genius of the Darwinian explanation is showing how complexity, and even just the appearance of design, can arise through unguided natural laws acting on very simple beginnings. A snowflake, for instance, exhibits magnificent complexity, but no one suggests a snowflake needs a designer. It just follows basic physics. To insist on a top-down designer after acknowledging the power of natural selection, that's committing intellectual special pleading. We have an explanation for the complex arrangement that doesn't invoke an external consciousness, so insisting on one anyway feels like you're applying scientific rigor selectively. Let's delve deeper into this mechanism you champion. If God intended the emergence of complex, moral, conscious life, why choose a process described by its most famous proponents as, quote, wasteful, profligate, and cruel? I'm referring to the immense suffering that is inherent in natural selection, the sheer failure rate, the starvation, the predation, the disease. I mean, just think of the continuous threat of viruses like SARS-CoV-2. This level of intrinsic, necessary suffering seems profoundly inconsistent with a God who is supposed to be both all-powerful and universally benevolent.
That is an extremely powerful moral argument. And you're right. Theologians have wrestled with it for millennia. We categorize this suffering as physical evil, which is distinct from moral evil inflicted by humans. Physical evil, an earthquake, a disease, a hurricane, is an unavoidable component of a universe governed by consistent natural laws. If God is truly the great mathematician, interested in order and predictability, then he must allow those physical laws to play out without constant micro-level interference. If God constantly intervened, preventing every pathogen, shielding every creature from every single predator, science itself would be impossible, and the world would lack all stability and predictability. That consistent framework is necessary for any kind of meaningful existence, and, well, suffering is the price of a genuine independent reality.
Okay, but I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, not at all, because it forces you into what I see as a severe logical inconsistency regarding intervention. You argue that God can't interfere with physical laws to prevent suffering because it would disrupt predictability. Yet you simultaneously maintain a belief in specific, highly localized miracles, the resurrection, healings, answered prayers, which fundamentally suspend those very laws. You can't claim that God adheres to cosmic order to explain away the problem of evil, and then turn around and claim God violates that same order to deliver a targeted message.
It's not inconsistent if God is the author and sustainer of those laws. As the author, God is entirely sovereign and is able to decide when a temporary suspension is required for a greater purpose. The universe remains predictable 99.99% of the time, allowing physics and biology to function. But God retains the authority to intervene in what you might call the great ganglions of history, moments of critical importance, like the founding of a major spiritual tradition or the ultimate defeat of death, to convey a critical message that is otherwise impossible under the constraints of natural law. These exceptions are deliberate and rare, not just random disruptions.
But if a creator is willing to suspend the laws for a localized theological message, why not suspend them briefly to prevent the suffering of a child from a preventable disease? I mean, the selection of what constitutes a critical ganglion seems arbitrary and frankly self-serving. It seems designed purely to protect the theological position against the scientific reality of suffering. By choosing when to interfere and when not to, you undermine your own original premise that an orderly law-governed universe is necessary for predictability and a meaningful existence.
And if we leave the logical problems of intervention in biology for just a moment, another major challenge arises in cosmology, specifically this issue of cosmic fine-tuning. Many proponents of the designer concept point to the precise calibration of fundamental constants, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the cosmological constant. Exactly. And these values are not arbitrary. They have to be set with almost incomprehensible precision, or the universe could not harbor complex life, or even atomic structure. For example, the cosmological constant, which determines the acceleration of the universe's expansion, must be precise to 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. That kind of calibration strongly suggests the necessity of a great mathematician, an architect, or an adjuster behind the universe. This is powerful empirical evidence that points toward a mind. I find the scientific alternative, the multiverse, proposing an infinite number of universes with different constants, to be an extremely radical and, crucially, experimentally untestable hypothesis.
That's a very compelling statement of the fine-tuning argument, but I'm sorry, I just don't buy that line of reasoning. Here's why. This approach commits the philosophical fallacy of special pleading. You accept the scientific observation, the incredible precision of the constants, but then you reject the theoretical consequence proposed by physicists, like the multiverse, in favor of the Judeo-Christian God. The multiverse hypothesis, though challenging to test, is at least derived from physical theory, whereas the Judeo-Christian God is an explanation that lacks any external, non-circular empirical evidence.
But the multiverse is just a philosophical escape hatch. It's designed to avoid the conclusion of a designer.
Perhaps, but you're swapping one mystery for another, far greater one. Furthermore, introducing a complex creator God only deepens the explanatory problem. If the universe is so complex that it requires a designer, then this creator God must be even more complex to be capable of conceiving and implementing all those precise constants and mechanisms. So you then face the logical problem of infinite regress. You have to explain the origin and complexity of that creator, and then the creator of that creator, and so on. It simplifies absolutely nothing. The scientific worldview, by contrast, seeks to explain complexity from simplicity, stopping the chain of explanation with the simple, unguided laws themselves.
But we have to acknowledge that science, as good as it is at explaining the material, leaves us with these profound questions regarding meaning, purpose, and morality, the very things that define the human condition. Consider human morality. Behaviors like radical, costly altruism, a nurse risking her life during a pandemic for a total stranger, or someone adopting a child from across continents, or even the capacity for unconditional forgiveness. These acts, coupled with the universal human concept that there is good and evil, are very difficult to explain purely through material processes aimed at survival. I believe they represent inherent moral signposts left by a creator.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame those behaviors quite differently. A purely Darwinian explanation for these noble acts is that they are evolutionary artifacts, or misfirings, rooted in mechanisms that were profoundly successful in our ancestral environment. Altruism evolved through two main drivers: kin selection, protecting relatives who share your genes, and reciprocity. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. This successful behavior established a very powerful rule of thumb in our small, cooperative ancestral groups. Now, when we apply that hardwired impulse universally in large modern societies, where helping a stranger in Africa or a complete stranger in an ICU no longer directly benefit one's own genes, it appears radical and sublime. But genetically, it's just the consequence of a mechanism that was successful in the past being applied outside of its original context.
Providing this explanation isn't to dismiss the nobility of the acts, not at all, but simply to explain their origin through natural, undirected processes. But you are reducing the sublime to the merely mechanistic. You are essentially saying that the ultimate human striving for good, for justice, is just a mistake, a glitch in the system. I find that deeply unsatisfying, and it just doesn't align with the internal, powerful human conviction that morality is an objective reality, not just a useful chemical reaction in our brains.
And I would challenge your claim of a universal morality. It's pretty clear that this claim is often viewed entirely through a specific Western Judeo-Christian lens. Historically, what we often call universal morality is frequently the result of cultural imposition. We see instances, particularly during colonization, where specific moral visions were enforced, creating an illusion of universality that masks profound cultural relativity and change. For instance, what Western culture considers abhorrent today, like certain historical views on slavery or gender or justice, was at one point sanctioned by the very religious texts you cite. Morality changes and evolves, and demonstrably for the better, something much easier to account for if it is a social and evolutionary construct than if it is eternally prescribed by a deity.
But even in the examples you cite, the imposition was of a specific code, not of the fundamental awareness of obligation. The innate conviction that I ought to do good, and the knowledge of good versus evil. That remains universal, even if the application of the code shifts. That deep-seated conviction remains, for me, the most powerful signpost of intentionality. So, to conclude, I would stress that while science is an unparalleled tool for explaining the material nature of the universe, the how, it remains fundamentally incapable of answering the profound questions of existence, ultimate purpose, and the origin of goodness. The compatibility I argue for, where God is the author of both the physical laws and the evolutionary mechanism, provides a rational, consistent framework for viewing the universe as designed and intentional, where morality is inherent, not just an accidental artifact.
And I remain convinced that the evidence presents a compelling case against the compatibility of science and faith. particularly as defined by the need for a personal intervening designer. The logical problems associated with interventionist miracles, the selective suspension of laws, and the unnecessary complication introduced by postulating an even more complex creator, these remain significant intellectual hurdles. The scientific worldview, I think, is robust enough to explain complexity, altruism, and the physical constants by invoking only unguided natural laws without resorting to concepts that lack empirical evidence.
The tension remains then. It's between the elegance and the explanatory power of scientific naturalism and the deep human desire to understand the intentionality and moral depth of our own existence.
A tension that really defines this intellectual territory and will undoubtedly continue to drive human inquiry into the material we've examined today.
Hey there, you arrived to the end of this episode. You can always check out my YouTube channel and also keep watching because there are 7 episodes. So if you enjoyed this one, hopefully you are going to enjoy the next one. I always like to remember that you can support my work by buying my books. Even though I still don't have a book about religion, which is the main topic of the podcast, I do have a book about artificial intelligence. And also I have a blog called Scientists Free from Religion on Medium. And there are several blog posts there. And you can enjoy it, you can read it, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can share it with your friends. So hopefully I can hear from you and hope you had an amazing time. So hope to see you in the next episode.